Section 12 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tavarish. Options by O. Henry. No story. To avoid having this book hurled into a corner of the room by the suspicious reader, I will assert in time that this is not a newspaper story. You will encounter no shirt-sleeved, omniscient city editor, no prodigy cub reporter just off the farm, no scoop, no story, no anything. But if you will concede me the setting of the first scene in the reporter's room of the Morning Beacon, I will repay the favor by keeping strictly my promises set forth above. I was doing space work on the Beacon, hoping to be put on a salary. Someone had cleared with a rake or a shovel a small space for me at the end of a long table, piled high with exchanges, congressional records, and old files. There I did my work. I wrote whatever the city whispered or roared or chuckled to me on my diligent wanderings about its streets. My income was not regular. One day Tripp came in and leaned on my table. Tripp was something in the mechanical department. I think he had something to do with the pictures, for he smelled of autographer's supplies, and his hands were always stained and cut up with acids. He was about 25 and looked 40. Half of his face was covered with short, curly red whiskers that looked like a doormat with the welcome left off. He was pale and unhealthy and miserable and phoning and an assiduous borrower of sums ranging from 25 cents to $1. $1 was his limit. He knew the extent of his credit as well as the Chemical National Bank knows the amount of H2O that collateral will show on analysis. When he sat on my table he held one hand with the other to keep both from shaking. Whiskey. He had a spurious air of lightness and bravado about him that deceived no one, but was useful in his borrowing because it was so pitifully and perceptibly assumed. This day I had coaxed from the cashier 5 shining silver dollars as a grumbling advance on a story that the Sunday editor had reluctantly accepted. So if I was not feeling at peace with the world, at least an armistice had been declared, and I was beginning with ardor to write a description of the Brooklyn Bridge by moonlight. "Well, Tripp," said I, looking up at him rather impatiently, "how goes it?" He was looking today more miserable, more cringing and haggard and downtrodden than I had ever seen him. He was at that stage of misery where he drew your pity so fully that you longed to kick him. "Have you got $1?" asked Tripp with his most fawning look and his dog-like eyes that blinked in the narrow space between his high-growing matted beard and his low-growing matted hair. "I have," said I. And again I said, "I have," more loudly and inhospitably. "And 4 besides. And I had hard work corkscrewing them out of old Atkinson, I can tell you. And I drew them," I continued, "to meet a want, a hiatus, a demand, a need, an exigency, a requirement of exactly $5. I was driven to emphasis by the premonition that I was to lose one of the dollars on the spot. "I don't want to borrow any," said Tripp, and I breathed again. "I thought you'd like to get put on to a good story," he went on. "I've got a rattling fine one for you. You ought to make it run a column at least. It'll make a dandy if you work it up right. It'll probably cost you $1 or $2 to get the stuff. I don't want anything out of it myself." I became placated. The proposition showed that Tripp appreciated past favors, although he did not return them. If he had been wise enough to strike me for a quarter, then he would have got it. "What is the story?" I asked, poising my pencil with a finely calculated editorial air. "I'll tell you," said Tripp. "It's a girl, a beauty, one of the howlingest Amsden's Junes you ever saw. Rosebuds covered with dew, violets in their mossy bed, and truck like that. She's lived on Long Island 20 years and never saw New York City before. I ran against her on 34th Street. She'd just got in on the East River Ferry. I tell you, she's a beauty that would take the hydrogen out of all the peroxides in the world. She stopped me on the street and asked me where she could find George Brown. Asked me where she could find George Brown in New York City. What do you think of that? I talked to her and found that she was going to marry a young farmer named Dodd, Hiram Dodd, next week. But it seems that George Brown still holds the championship in her youthful fancy. George had greased his cowhide boots some years ago and came to the city to make his fortune. But he forgot to remember to show up again at Greenburg, and Hiram got in as second best choice. But when it comes to the scratch, Ada, her name is Ada Lowry, saddles a nag and rides 8 miles to the railroad station and catches the 6:45 a.m. train for the city. Looking for George, you know. You understand about women. George wasn't there, so she wanted him. Well, you know I couldn't leave her loose in Wolftown on the Hudson. I suppose she thought the first person she inquired of would say, "George Brown, why, yes, let me see. He's a short man with light blue eyes, ain't he? Oh, yes, you'll find George in 125th Street, right next to the grocery. He's bill clerk in a saddle and harness store." That's about how innocent and beautiful she is. You know those little Long Island waterfront villages like Greenburg? A couple of duck farms for sport and clams and about 9 summer visitors for industries. That's the kind of a place she comes from. But say, you ought to see her. What could I do? I don't know what money looks like in the morning. And she'd paid her last cent of pocket money for her railroad ticket except a quarter, which she had squandered on gumdrops. She was eating them out of a paper bag. I took her to a boarding house on 32nd Street where I used to live, and hocked her. She is in a soak for $1. That's old Mother McGinnis' price per day. I'll show you the house. "What words are these, Tripp?" said I. "I thought you said you had a story. Every ferry boat that crosses the East River brings or takes away girls from Long Island." The premature lines on Tripp's face grew deeper. He frowned seriously from his tangle of hair. He separated his hands and emphasized his answer with one shaking forefinger. "Can't you see," he said, "what a rattling fine story it would make? You could do it fine. All about the romance, you know, and describe the girl, and put a lot of stuff in it about true love, and sling in a few stickfuls of funny business, joshing the Long Islanders about being green, and, well, you know how to do it. You ought to get $15 out of it anyhow, and it'll cost you only about $4. You'll make a clear profit of 11. "How will it cost me $4? I asked suspiciously. $1 to Mrs. McGinnis, Tripp answered promptly, and $2 to pay the girl's fare back home. And the fourth dimension? I inquired, making a rapid mental calculation. $1 to me, said Tripp, for whiskey. Are you on? I smiled enigmatically and spread my elbows as if to begin writing again. But this grim, abject, specious, subservient, burr-like wreck of a man would not be shaken off. His forehead suddenly became shiningly moist. "Don't you see," he said with a sort of desperate calmness, "that this girl has got to be sent home today, not tonight nor tomorrow, but today. I can't do anything for her. You know, I'm the janitor and corresponding secretary of the Down and Out Club. I thought you could make a newspaper story out of it and win out a piece of money on general results. But anyhow, don't you see that she's got to get back home before tonight?" And then I began to feel that dull, leaden, soul-depressing sensation known as the sense of duty. Why should that sense fall upon one as a weight and a burden? I knew that I was doomed that day to give up the bulk of my store of hard-wrung coin to the relief of this Ada Lowry. But I swore to myself that Tripp's $whiskey would not be forthcoming. He might play knight-errant at my expense, but he would indulge in no wassail afterward, commemorating my weakness and gullibility. In a kind of chilly anger I put on my coat and hat. Tripp, submissive, cringing, vainly endeavoring to please, conducted me via the streetcars to the human pawn shop of Mother McGinnis. I paid the fares. It seems that the collodion-scented Don Quixote and the smallest minted coin were strangers. Tripp pulled the bell at the door of the moldy red-brick boarding-house. At its faint tinkle he paled and crouched as a rabbit makes ready to spring away at the sound of a hunting dog. I guessed what a life he had led, terror-haunted by the coming footsteps of landladies. "Give me one of the dollars, quick," he said. The door opened 6 inches. Mother McGinnis stood there with white eyes. They were white, I say, and a yellow face, holding together at her throat with one hand a dingy pink flannel dressing sack. Tripp thrust the dollar through the space without a word, and it bought us entry. "She's in the parlor," said the McGinnis, turning the back of her sack upon us. In the dim parlor a girl sat at the crackled marble center table, weeping comfortably and eating gumdrops. She was a flawless beauty. Crying had only made her brilliant eyes brighter. When she crunched a gumdrop you thought only of the poetry of motion and envied the senseless confection. Eve, at the age of 5 minutes, must have been a ringer for Miss Ada Lowry at 19 or 20. I was introduced, and the gumdrop suffered neglect while she conveyed to me a naive interest, such as a puppy dog, a prize winner, would bestow upon a crawling beetle or a frog. Tripp took his stand by the table with the fingers of one hand spread upon it, as an attorney or a master of ceremonies might have stood. But he looked the master of nothing. His faded coat was buttoned high, as if it sought to be charitable to deficiencies of tie and linen. I thought of a Scotch terrier at the sight of his shifty eyes in the glade between his tangled hair and beard. For one ignoble moment I felt ashamed of having been introduced as his friend in the presence of so much beauty in distress. But evidently Tripp meant to conduct the ceremonies, whatever they might be. I thought I detected in his actions and pose an intention of foisting the situation upon me as material for a newspaper story, in a lingering hope of extracting from me his $whiskey. "My friend," I shuddered. "Mr. Chalmers," said Tripp, will tell you, Miss Lowery, the same that I did. He's a reporter, and he can hand out the talk better than I can. That's why I brought him with me. Oh, Tripp, wasn't it the silver-tongued orator you wanted? He's wise to a lot of things, and he'll tell you now what's best to do." I stood on one foot, as it were, as I sat in my rickety chair. "Why, Miss Lowery," I began, secretly enraged at Tripp's awkward opening, "I am at your service, of course, but, as I haven't been apprised of the circumstances of the case,
"Oh," said Miss Lowery, beaming for a moment, "it ain't as bad as that. There ain't any circumstances. It's the first time I've ever been in New York, except once when I was 5 years old, and I had no idea it was such a big town. And I met Mr. Snip on the street and asked him about a friend of mine, and he brought me here and asked me to wait."
"I advise you, Miss Lowery," said Tripp, "to tell Mr. Chalmers all. He's a friend of mine." I was getting used to it by this time. "And he'll give you the right tip."
"Why, certainly," said Miss Ada, chewing a gumdrop toward me. "There ain't anything to tell except that, well, everything's fixed for me to marry Hiram Dodd next Thursday evening. Hi has got 200 acres of land with a lot of shore front and one of the best truck farms on the island. But this morning I had my horse saddled up, he's a white horse named Dancer, and I rode over to the station. I told him at home I was going to spend the day with Susie Adams. It was a story, I guess, but I don't care. And I came to New York on the train, and I met Mr. Flip on the street and asked him if he knew where I could find
"Now, Miss Lowery,"
broke in Tripp loudly and with much bad taste, I thought, as she hesitated with her word.
"you like this young man, Hiram Dodd, don't you? He's all right and good to you, ain't he?"
"Of course I like him," said Miss Lowery emphatically. "Hi's all right. And of course he's good to me. So is everybody."
I could have sworn it myself.
Throughout Miss Ada Lowery's life, all men would be too good to her. They would strive, contrive, struggle, and compete to hold umbrellas over her hat, check her trunk, pick up her handkerchief, and buy for her soda at the fountain. "But," went on Miss Lowery, "last night I got to thinking about George, and I—" Down went the bright gold head upon dimpled clasped hands on the table. Such a beautiful April storm. Unrestrainedly she sobbed. I wished I could have comforted her, but I was not George, and I was glad I was not Hiram, and yet I was sorry, too. By and by the shower passed. She straightened up, brave and halfway smiling. She would have made a splendid wife, for crying only made her eyes more bright and tender. She took a gumdrop and began her story. "I guess I'm a terrible hayseed," she said between her little gulps and sighs, "but I can't help it. George Brown and I were sweethearts since he was 8 and I was 5. When he was 19, that was 4 years ago, he left Greenburg and went to the city. He said he was going to be a policeman or a railroad president or something, and then he was coming back for me. But I never heard from him any more, and I liked him." Another flow of tears seemed imminent, but Tripp hurled himself into the crevasse and damned it. Confound him! I could see his game. He was trying to make a story of it for his sordid ends and profit. "Go on, Mr. Chalmers," said he, "and tell the lady what's the proper caper. That's what I told her. You'd hand it to her straight. Spiel up." I coughed and tried to feel less wrathful toward Tripp. I saw my duty. Cunningly I had been inveigled, but I was securely trapped.
Tripp's first dictum to me had been just and correct. The young lady must be sent back to Greenburg that day. She must be argued with, convinced, assured, instructed, ticketed, and returned without delay. I hated Hiram and despised George, but duty must be done. Noblesse oblige, and only $5 are not strictly romantic compatibles, but sometimes they can be made to jibe. It was mine to be Sir Oracle, and then pay the freight. So I assumed an air that mingled Solomon's with that of the general passenger agent of the Long Island Railroad. "Miss Lowery," said I, as impressively as I could, "life is rather a queer proposition after all." There was a familiar sound to these words after I had spoken them, and I hoped Miss Lowery had never heard Mr. Cohen's song. "Those whom we first love we seldom wed. Our earlier romances, tinged with the magic radiance of youth, often fail to materialize." The last three words sounded somewhat trite when they struck the air. "But those fondly cherished dreams," I went on, "may cast a pleasant afterglow on our future lives, however impracticable and vague they may have been. But life is full of realities as well as visions and dreams. One cannot live on memories. May I ask, Miss Lowery, if you think you could pass a happy, that is, a contented and harmonious life with Mr. Dodd, if in other ways than romantic recollections he seems to fill the bill, as I might say?" "Oh, he's all right," answered Miss Lowery. "Yes, I could get along with him fine. He's promised me an automobile and a motor boat, but somehow when it got so close to the time I was to marry him, I couldn't help wishing, well, just thinking about George. Something must have happened to him, or he'd have written. On the day he left, he and me got a hammer and a chisel and cut a dime into two pieces. I took one piece and he took the other, and we promised to be true to each other and always keep the pieces till we saw each other again. I've got mine at home now, in a ring box, in the top drawer of my dresser. I guess I was silly to come up here looking for him. I never realized what a big place it is." And then Tripp joined in with a little grating laugh that he had, still trying to drag in a little story or drama to earn the miserable dollar that he craved. "Oh, the boys from the country forget a lot when they come to the city and learn something. I guess George maybe is on the bum, or got roped in by some other girl, or maybe gone to the dogs on account of whiskey or the races. You listen to Mr. Chalmers and go back home, and you'll be all right." But now the time was come for action, for the hands of the clock were moving close to noon. Frowning upon Tripp, I argued gently and philosophically with Miss Lowery, delicately convincing her of the importance of returning home at once. And I impressed upon her the truth that it would not be absolutely necessary to her future happiness that she mentioned to Hi the wonders of the fact of her visit to the city that had swallowed up the unlucky George. She said she had left her horse, unfortunate Rocinante, tied to a tree near the railroad station. Tripp and I gave her instructions to mount the patient steed as soon as she arrived and ride home as fast as possible. There she was to recount the exciting adventure of a day spent with Susie Adams. She could fix Susie, I was sure of that, and all would be well. And then, being susceptible to the barbed arrows of beauty, I warmed to the adventure. The three of us hurried to the ferry, and there I found the price of a ticket to Greenburg to be but $1.80. I bought one, and a red rose with the 20 cents for Miss Lowery. We saw her aboard her ferry boat, and stood watching her wave her handkerchief at us until it was the tiniest white patch imaginable. And then Tripp and I faced each other, brought back to earth, left dry and desolate in the shade of the somber verities of life. The spell wrought by beauty and romance was dwindling. I looked at Tripp and almost sneered. He looked more careworn, contemptible, and disreputable than ever. I fingered the $2 remaining in my pocket and looked at him with the half-closed eyelids of contempt. He mustered up an imitation of resistance. "Can't you get a story out of it?" he asked huskily. "Some sort of a story, even if you have to fake part of it?" "Not a line," said I. "I can fancy the look on Grimes's face if I should try to put over any slush like this. But we've helped the little lady out, and that'll have to be our only reward." "I'm sorry," said Tripp almost inaudibly. "I'm sorry you're out your money. Now it seemed to me like a find of a big story. You know, that is a sort of thing that would write up pretty well." "Let's try to forget it," said I, with a praiseworthy attempt at gaiety, "and take the next car across town." I steeled myself against his unexpressed but palpable desire. He should not coax, cajole, or wring from me the dollar he craved. I had had enough of this wild goose chase. Tripp feebly unbuttoned his coat of the faded pattern and glossy seams to reach for something that had once been a handkerchief deep down in some obscure and cavernous pocket. As he did so, I caught the shine of a cheap silver-plated watch chain across his vest, and something dangling from it caused me to stretch forth my hand and seize it curiously. It was the half of a silver dime that had been cut in halves with a chisel. "What?" I said, looking at him keenly. "Oh, yes," he responded dully. "George Brown, alias Tripp. What's the use?" Barring the WCTU, I'd like to know if anybody disapproves of my having produced promptly from my pocket Tripp's whiskey dollar, and unhesitatingly laying it in his hand. End of no story. Section 13 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tavarish. Options by O. Henry. The Higher Pragmatism. 1. Where to go for wisdom has become a question of serious import. The ancients are discredited. Plato is boilerplate. Aristotle is tottering. Marcus Aurelius is reading. Aesop has been copyrighted by Indiana. Solomon is too solemn. You couldn't get anything out of Epictetus with a pick. The ant, which for many years served as a model of intelligence and industry in the school readers, has been proven to be a doddering idiot and a waster of time and effort. The owl today is hooted at. Chautauqua conventions have abandoned culture and adopted Diabolo. Graybeards give glowing testimonials to the vendors of patent hair restorers. There are typographical errors in the almanacs published by the daily newspapers. College professors have become, but there shall be no personalities. To sit in classes, to delve into the encyclopedia or the past performances page will not make us wise. As the poet says, knowledge comes, but wisdom lingers. Wisdom is dew which, while we know it not, soaks into us, refreshes us, and makes us grow. Knowledge is a strong stream of water turned on us through a hose. It disturbs our roots. Then let us rather gather wisdom. But how to do so requires knowledge. If we know a thing, we know it. But very often we are not wise to it that we are wise and... But let's go on with the story. 2. Once upon a time I found a 10-cent magazine lying on a bench in a little city park. Anyhow, that was the amount he asked me for when I sat on the bench next to him. He was a musty, dingy, and tattered magazine, with some queer stories bound in him, I was sure. He turned out to be a scrapbook. "I am a newspaper reporter," I said to him to try him. "I have been detailed to write up some of the experiences of the unfortunate ones who spend their evenings in this park. May I ask you to what you attribute your downfall in—" I was interrupted by a laugh from my purchase, a laugh so rusty and unpracticed that I was sure it had been his first for many a day. "Oh, no, no," said he, "you ain't a reporter. Reporters don't talk that way. They pretend to be one of us, and say they've just got in on the blind baggage from St. Louis. I can tell a reporter on sight. Us park bums get to be fine judges of human nature. We sit here all day and watch the people go by. I can size up anybody who walks past my bench in a way that would surprise you." "Well," I said, "go on and tell me. How do you size me up?" "I should say," said the student of human nature with unpardonable hesitation, "that you was, say, in the contracting business, or maybe worked in a store, was a sign painter. You stopped in the park to finish your cigar, and thought you'd get a little free monologue out of me. Still, you might be a plasterer or a lawyer. It's getting kind of dark, you see. And your wife won't let you smoke at home." I frowned gloomily. "But, judging again," went on the reader of men, "I'd say you ain't got a wife." "No," said I, rising restlessly. No, I ain't. But I will have by the arrows of Cupid. That is, if—" My voice must have trailed away and muffled itself in uncertainty and despair. "I see you have a story yourself," said the dusty vagrant, impudently it seemed to me. "Suppose you take your dime back and spin your yarn for me. I'm interested myself in the ups and downs of unfortunate ones who spend their evenings in the park." Somehow that amused me. I looked at the frowsy derelict with more interest. I did have a story. Why not tell it to him? I had told none of my friends. I had always been a reserved and bottled-up man. It was physical timidity or sensitiveness, perhaps both. And I smiled to myself in wonder when I felt an impulse to confide in this stranger and vagabond. "Jack," said I. "Mac," said he. "Mac," said I, "I'll tell you." "Do you want the dime back in advance?" said he. I handed him $1. "The dime," said I, "was the price of listening to your story." "Right on the point of the jaw," said he. "Go on." And then, incredible as it may seem to the lovers of the world who confide their sorrows only to the night wind and the gibbous moon, I laid bare my secret to that wreck of all things that you would have supposed to be in sympathy with love. I told him of the days and weeks and months that I had spent in adoring Mildred Telfair. I spoke of my despair, my grievous days and wakeful nights, my dwindling hopes and distress of mind. I even pictured to this night prowler her beauty and dignity, the great sway she had in society, and the magnificence of her life as the elder daughter of an ancient race whose pride overbalanced the dollars of the city's millionaires. "Why don't you cop the lady out?" asked Mac, bringing me down to earth and dialect again. I explained to him that my worth was so small, my income so minute, and my fears so large, that I hadn't the courage to speak to her of my worship. I told him that in her presence I could only blush and stammer, and that she looked upon me with a wonderful, maddening smile of amusement. "She kind of moves in the professional class, don't she?" asked Mac. "The Telfair family," I began haughtily. "I mean professional beauty," said my hearer. "Oh, she is greatly and widely admired," I answered cautiously. "Any sisters?" "One." "You know any more girls?" "Why, several," I answered, "and a few others." "Say," said Mac, "tell me one thing. Can you hand out the dope to other girls? Can you chin 'em and make matinee eyes at 'em and squeeze 'em? You know what I mean. You're just shy when it comes to this particular dame, the professional beauty. Ain't that right?" "In a way, you have outlined the situation with approximate truth," I admitted. "I thought so," said Mac grimly. "Now, that reminds me of my own case. I'll tell you about it." I was indignant, but concealed it. What was this loafer's case, or anybody's case, compared with mine? Besides, I had given him $1.10. "Feel my muscle," said my companion, suddenly flexing his biceps. I did so mechanically. The fellows in gyms are always asking you to do that. His arm was as hard as cast iron. "4 years ago," said Mac, "I could lick any man in New York outside of the professional ring. Your case and mine is just the same. I come from the West Side, between 30th and 14th. I won't give a number on the door. I was a scrapper when I was 10, and when I was 20, no amateur in the city could stand up 4 rounds with me. It's a fact. You know Bill McCarty? No? He managed the smokers for some of them swell clubs. Well, I knocked out everything Bill brought up before me. I was a middleweight, but could train down to a welter when necessary. I boxed all over the West Side, all bouts and benefits and private entertainments, and was never put out once. But say the first time I put my foot in the ring with a professional, I was no more than a canned lobster. I don't know how it was. I seemed to lose heart. I guess I got too much imagination. There was a formality and publicness about it that kind of weakened my nerve. I never won a fight in the ring. Lightweights and all kinds of scrubs used to sign up with my manager and then walk up and tap me on the wrist and see me fall. The minute I seen the crowd and a lot of gents in evening clothes down in front and seen a professional come inside the ropes, I got as weak as ginger ale. Of course, it wasn't long till I couldn't get no backers, and I didn't have any more chances to fight a professional or many amateurs either. But let me tell you,
I was as good as most men inside the ring or out. It was just that dumb dead feeling I had when I was up against a regular that always done me up. Well, sir, after I had got out of the business, I got a mighty grouch on. I used to go around town licking private citizens and all kinds of unprofessionals just to please myself. I'd lick cops in dark streets and car conductors and cab drivers and draymen whenever I could start a row with them. It didn't make any difference how big they were or how much science they had. I got away with them. If I'd only just have had the confidence in the ring that I had beating up the best men outside of it, I'd be wearing black pearls and heliotrope silk socks today. One evening I was walking along near the Bowery thinking about things when along comes a slumming party. About 6 or 7 they was, all in swallowtails and these silk hats that don't shine. One of the gang kind of shoves me off the sidewalk. I hadn't had a scrap in 3 days, and I just says, "Delighted," and hits him back of the ear. Well, we had it. That Johnny put up as decent a little fight as you'd want to see in the moving pictures. It was on a side street and no cops around. The other guy had a lot of science, but it only took me about 6 minutes to lay him out. Some of the swallowtails dragged him up against some steps and began to fan him. Another one of them comes over to me and says, "Young man, do you know what you've done?" "Oh, beat it," says I. "I've done nothing but a little punching bag work. Take Freddy back to Yale and tell him to quit studying sociology on the wrong side of the sidewalk." "My good fellow," says he, "I don't know who you are, but I'd like to. You've knocked out Reddy Burns, the champion middleweight of the world. He came to New York yesterday to try to get a match on with Jim Jeffries. If you—" But when I come out of my faint, I was laying on the floor in a drugstore saturated with aromatic spirits of ammonia. If I'd known that was Reddy Burns, I'd have got down in the gutter and crawled past him instead of handing him one like I did. Why, if I'd ever been in a ring and seen him climbing over the ropes, I'd have been all to the sal volatile. "So that's what imagination does," concluded Mac. "And as I said, your case and mine is simultaneous. You'll never win out. You can't go up against professionals. I tell you, it's a park bench for yours in this romance business." Mac the pessimist laughed harshly. "I am afraid I don't see the parallel," I said coldly. "I have only a very slight acquaintance with the prize ring." The derelict touched my sleeve with his forefinger for emphasis as he explained his parable. "Every man," said he with some dignity, "has got his lamps on something that looks good to him. With you, it's this dame that you're afraid to say your say to. With me, it was to win out in the ring. Well, you'll lose just like I did." "Why do you think I shall lose?" I asked warmly. "'Cause," says he, "you're afraid to go in the ring. You dassn't stand up before a professional. Your case and mine is just the same. You're an amateur. And that means that you'd better keep outside of the ropes." "Well, I must be going," I said, rising and looking with elaborate care at my watch. When I was 20 feet away, the park bencher called to me. "Much obliged for the $1," he said, "and for the dime. But you'll never get her. You're in the amateur class." "Serves you right," I said to myself, "for hobnobbing with the tramp.
His impudence! But as I walked, his words seemed to repeat themselves over and over again in my brain. I think I even grew angry at the man. "I'll show him," I finally said aloud. "I'll show him that I can fight Reddy Burns, too, even knowing who he is." I hurried to a telephone booth and rang up the Telfair residence. A soft, sweet voice answered. Didn't I know that voice? My hand holding the receiver shook. "Is that you?" said I, employing the foolish words that formed the vocabulary of every talker through the telephone. "Yes, this is I," came back the answer in the low, clear-cut tones that are an inheritance of the Telfairs. "Who is it, please?" "It's me," said I, less ungrammatically than egotistically. "It's me, and I've got a few things that I want to say to you right now, and immediately and straight to the point." "Dear me," said the voice. "Oh, it's you, Mr. Arden?" I wondered if any accent on the first word was intended. Mildred was fine at saying things that you had to study out afterward. "Yes," said I. "I hope so. And now to come down to brass tacks, I thought that rather a vernacularism, if there is such a word, as soon as I had said it, but I didn't stop to apologize. You know, of course, that I love you, and that I have been in that idiotic state for a long time. I don't want any more foolishness about it. That is, I mean, I want an answer from you right now. Will you marry me or not? Hold the wire, please. Keep out central. Hello? Hello? Will you or will you not?" That was just the uppercut for Reddy Burns' chin. The answer came back. "Why, Phil, dear, of course I will. I didn't know that that is, you never said. Oh, come up to the house, please. I can't say what I want to over the phone. You are so importunate, but please come up to the house, won't you?" Would I? I rang the bell of the Telfair house violently. Some sort of a human came to the door and shooed me into the drawing room. "Oh, well," said I to myself, looking at the ceiling, "anyone can learn from anyone. That was a pretty good philosophy of Mac's, anyhow. He didn't take advantage of his experience, but I get the benefit of it. If you want to get into the professional class, you've got to—" I stopped thinking then. Someone was coming down the stairs. My knees began to shake. I knew then how Mac had felt when a professional began to climb over the ropes. I looked around foolishly for a door or a window by which I might escape. If it had been any other girl approaching, I mightn't have. But just then the door opened, and Bess, Mildred's younger sister, came in. I'd never seen her look so much like a glorified angel. She walked straight up to me, and I'd never noticed before what perfectly wonderful eyes and hair Elizabeth Telfair had. "Phil," she said in the Telfair sweet, thrilling tones, "why didn't you tell me about it before? I thought it was sister you wanted all the time, until you telephoned to me a few minutes ago." I suppose Mac and I always will be hopeless amateurs. But as the thing has turned out in my case, I'm mighty glad of it. End of The Higher Pragmatism.
Section 14 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Roxanne Weber, RoxanneWeber.com. Options by O. Henry. Bestseller. 1. One day last summer, I went to Pittsburgh. Well, I had to go there on business. My chair car was profitably well filled with people of the kind one usually sees on chair cars. Most of them were ladies in brown silk dresses, cut with square yokes, with lace insertion and dotted veils, who refused to have the windows raised. Then there was the usual number of men, who looked as if they might be in almost any business and going almost anywhere. Some students of human nature can look at a man in a Pullman and tell you where he is from, his occupation and his stations in life, both flag and social, but I never could. The only way I can correctly judge a fellow traveler is when the train is held up by robbers, or when he reaches at the same time I do for the last towel in the dressing room of the sleeper. The porter came and brushed the collection of soot on the windowsill off to the left knee of my trousers. I removed it with an air of apology. The temperature was 88. One of the dotted-veiled ladies demanded the closing of 2 more ventilators and spoke loudly of Interlaken. I leaned back idly in chair number 7 and looked with the tepidest curiosity at the small, black, bald-spotted head just visible above the back of number 9. Suddenly, number 9 hurled a book to the floor between his chair and the window, and looking, I saw that it was The Rose Lady and Trevelyan, one of the best-selling novels of the present day. And then the critic, or Philistine, whichever he was, veered his chair toward the window, and I knew him at once for John A. Pescud, of Pittsburgh, traveling salesman for a plate-glass company, an old acquaintance whom I had not seen in 2 years. In 2 minutes we were faced, hand-shaken hands, and had finished with such topics as rain, prosperity, health, residence, and destination. Politics might have followed next, but I was not so ill-fated. I wish you might know John A. Pescud. He is of the stuff that heroes are not often lucky enough to be made of. He is a small man with a wide smile, and an eye that seems to be fixed upon that little red spot on the end of your nose. I never saw him wear but one kind of necktie, and he believes in cuff holders and button shoes. He is as hard and true as anything ever turned out by the Cambria Steel Works. And he believes that as soon as Pittsburgh makes smoke consumers compulsory, St. Peter will come down and sit at the foot of Smithfield Street and let somebody else attend to the gate up in the branch heaven. He believes that our plate glass is the most important commodity in the world, and that when a man is in his hometown, he ought to be decent and law-abiding. During my acquaintance with him in the city of diurnal night, I had never known his views on life, romance, literature, and ethics. We had browsed during our meetings on local topics, and then parted after Chateau Magaw, Irish stew, flannel cakes, cotton pudding, and coffee. Hey there, with milk separate. Now I was to get more of his ideas. By way of facts, he told me that business had picked up since the party conventions, and that he was going to get off at Coketown. "Hey," said Pescud, stirring his discarded book with the toe of his right shoe. "Did you ever read one of these bestsellers? I mean the kind where the hero is an American swell, sometimes even from Chicago, who falls in love with a royal princess from Europe who is traveling under an alias and follows her to her father's kingdom or principality? I guess you have. They're all alike. Sometimes this going-away masher is a Washington newspaper correspondent, and sometimes he is a Van something from New York, or a Chicago wheat broker worthy 50 millions. But he's always ready to break into the king row of any foreign country that sends over their queens and princesses to try the new plush seats on the Big Four or the B&O. There doesn't seem to be any reason in the book for their being there. Well, this fellow chases the royal chair warmer home, as I said, and finds out who she is. He meets her on the Corso or the Strasse one evening and gives us 10 pages of conversation. She reminds him of the difference in their stations, and then gives him a chance to ring in 3 solid pages about America's uncrowned sovereigns. If you'd take his remarks and set 'em to music, and then take the music away from 'em, they'd sound exactly like one of George Cohan's songs. Well, you know what it runs on. If you've read any of 'em, he slaps the king's Swiss bodyguards around like everything whenever they get in his way. He's a great fencer, too. Now, I've known of some Chicago men who were pretty notorious fences, but I never heard of any fencers coming from there. He stands on the first landing of the royal staircase in Castle Schutzenfestenstein with a gleaming rapier in his hand and makes a Baltimore broil of 6 platoons of traitors who come to massacre the said king. And then he has to fight duels with a couple of chancellors and foil a plot by 4 Austrian archdukes to seize the kingdom for a gasoline station. But the great scene is when his rival for the princess's hand, Count Fedor, attacks him between the porticos and the ruined chapel, armed with a mitrailleuse, a yataghan, and a couple of Siberian bloodhounds. This scene is what runs the bestseller into the 29th edition before the publisher has had time to draw a check for the advance royalties. The American hero shucks his coat and throws it over the heads of the bloodhounds, gives the mitrailleuse a slap with his mitt, says "Yah!" to the yataghan, and lands in Kid McCoy's best style on the Count's left eye. Of course, we have a neat little prize fighter right then and there. The Count, in order to make the go possible, seems to be an expert at the art of self-defense himself. And here we have the Corbett-Sullivan fight done over into literature. The book ends with the broker and the princess doing a John Cecil Clay cover under the linden trees on the Gorgonzola walk. That winds up the love story plenty good enough, but I notice that the book dodges the final issue. Even a bestseller has sense enough to shy at either leaving a Chicago grain broker on the throne of Lobster Potsdam or bringing over a real princess to eat fish and potato salad in an Italian chalet on Michigan Avenue. What do you think about 'em? "Why," I said, "I hardly know, John. There's a saying, love levels all ranks, you know." "Yes," said Pescud, "but these kind of love stories are rank on the level. I know something about literature, even if I am in plate glass. These kind of books are wrong, and yet I never go into a train but what they pile 'em up on me. No good can come out of an international clinch between the old world aristocracy and one of us fresh Americans. When people in real life marry, they generally hunt up somebody in their own station. A fellow usually picks out a girl that went to the same high school and belonged to the same singing society that he did. When young millionaires fall in love, they always select a chorus girl that likes the same kind of sauce on the lobster that he does. Washington newspaper correspondents always many window ladies 10 years older than themselves who keep boarding houses. No, sir, you can't make a novel sound right to me when it makes one of C.D. Gibson's bright young men go abroad and turn kingdoms upside down just because he's a Taft American and took a course at a gymnasium. And listen how they talk, too." Pescud picked up the bestseller and hunted his page. "Listen at this," he says. "Trevelyan is shinning with the Prince Alwana at the back end of the tulip garden. This is how it goes. Say not so, dearest and sweetest of earth's fairest flowers. Would I aspire? You are a star set high above me in a royal heaven. I am only myself, yet I am a man, and I have a heart to do and dare. I have no title save that of an uncrowned sovereign, but I have an arm and a sword that yet might free Schutz and Festenstein from the plots of traitors." Think of a Chicago man packing a sword and talking about freeing anything that sounded as much like canned pork as that. He'd be much more likely to fight to have an import duty put on it. "I think I understand you, John," I said. "You want fiction writers to be consistent with their scenes and characters. They shouldn't mix Turkish pashas with Vermont farmers, or English dukes with Long Island clam diggers, or Italian countesses with Montana cowboys, or Cincinnati brewery agents with the Rajas of India. Or plain businessmen with aristocracy high above 'em," added Pescud. "It don't jibe. People are divided into classes, whether we admit it or not, and it's everybody's impulse to stick to their own class. They do it, too. I don't see why people go to work and buy hundreds of thousands of books like that. You don't see or hear of any such Didios and capers in real life." 3. "Well, John," I said, "I haven't read a bestseller in a long time. Maybe I've had notions about them somewhat like yours. But tell me more about yourself. Getting along all right with the company?" "Bully," said Pescud, brightening at once. "I've had my salary raised twice since I saw you, and I get a commission, too. I've bought a neat slice of real estate out in the East End, and have run up a house on it. Next year, the firm is going to sell me some shares of stock. Oh, I'm in on the line of general prosperity, no matter who's elected." "Met your affinity yet, John?" I asked. "Oh, I didn't tell you about that, did I?" said Pescud with a broader grin. "Oh ho," I said. "So you've taken time enough off from your plate glass to have a romance?" "No, no," said John. "No romance, nothing like that. But I'll tell you about it. I was on the South Bend, going to Cincinnati about 18 months ago, when I saw across the aisle the finest-looking girl I'd ever laid eyes on. Nothing spectacular, you know, but just the sort you want for keeps. Well, I never was up to the flirtation business, either handkerchief, automobile, postage stamp, or doorstep, and she wasn't the kind to start anything. She read a book and minded her business, which was to make the world prettier and better just by residing on it. I kept on looking out of the side doors of my eyes, and finally the proposition got out of the Pullman class into a case of a cottage with a lawn and vines running over the porch. I never thought of speaking to her, but I let the plate glass business go to smash for a while. She changed cars at Cincinnati and took a sleeper to Louisville over the L&N. There she bought another ticket and went on through Shelbyville, Frankfort, and Lexington. Along there I began to have a hard time keeping up with her. The trains came along when they pleased and didn't seem to be going anywhere in particular, except to keep an eye on the track and the right-of-way as much as possible. Then they began to stop at junctions instead of towns, and at last they stopped altogether. I'll bet Pinkerton would outbid the plate glass people for my services any time, if they knew how I managed to shadow that young lady. I contrived to keep out of her sight as much as I could, but I never lost track of her. The last station she got off at was way down in Virginia, about 6 in the afternoon. There were about 50 houses and 400 niggers in sight. The rest was red mud, mules, and speckled hounds. A tall old man with a smooth face and white hair, looking as proud as Julius Caesar and Roscoe Conkling on the same postcard, was there to meet her. His clothes were frazzled, but I didn't notice that till later. He took her little satchel, and they started over the plank walks and went up a road along the hill. I kept along a piece behind him, trying to look like I was hunting a garnet ring in the sand that my sister had lost at a picnic the previous Saturday. They went in a gate on top of the hill. It nearly took my breath away when I looked up. Up there in the biggest grove I ever saw was a tremendous house with round white pillars, about 1,000 feet high, and the yard was so full of rose bushes and box bushes and lilacs that you couldn't have seen the house if it hadn't been as big as the capital of Washington. "Here's where I have to trail," says I to myself. I thought before that she seemed to be in moderate circumstances, at least. This must be the governor's mansion or the agricultural building of a New World's Fair, anyhow. I'd better go back to the village and get posted by the postmaster or drug the druggist for some information. In the village, I find a pine hotel called the Bayview House. The only excuse for the name was a bay horse grazing in the front yard. I set my sample case down and tried to be ostensible. I told the landlord I was taking orders for plate glass. "I don't want no plates," says he, "but I do need another glass molasses pitcher." By and by I got him down to local gossip and answering questions. "Why," he says, "I thought everybody knowed who lived in the big white house on the hill. It's Colonel Allen, the biggest man and the finest quality in Virginia, or anywhere else. They're the oldest family in the state. That was his daughter that got off the train. She's been up to Illinois to see her aunt, who is sick." I registered at the hotel, and on the third day I caught the young lady walking in the front yard, down next to the paling fence. I stopped and raised my hat. There wasn't any other way. "Excuse me," says I, "can you tell me where Mr. Hinkle lives?" She looks at me as cool as if I was the man come to see about the weeding of the garden. But I thought I saw just a slight twinkle of fun in her eyes. "No one of that name lives in Birchton," says she. "That is," she goes on, "as far as I know. Is the gentleman you are seeking white?" Well, that tickled me. "No kidding," says I. "I'm not looking for smoke, even if I do come from Pittsburgh." "You are quite a distance from home," she says. "I'd have gone 1,000 miles farther," says I. "Not if you hadn't waked up when the train started in Shelbyville," says she. and then she turned almost as red as one of those roses on the bushes in the yard. I remembered I had dropped off to sleep on a bench in the Shelbyville station, waiting to see which train she took, and only just managed to wake up in time. And then I told her why I had come, as respectful and earnest as I could. And I told her everything about myself and what I was making, and how that all I asked was just to get acquainted with her and try to get her to like me. She smiles a little and blushes some, but her eyes never get mixed up. They look straight at whatever she's talking to. "I never had anyone talk like this to me before, Mr. Pescud," she says. "What did you say your name is? John?" "John A.," says I. "And you came mighty near missing the train at Powhatan Junction, too," she says with a laugh that sounded as good as a mileage book to me. "How did you know?" I asked. "Men are very clumsy," said she. "I knew you were on every train. I thought you were going to speak to me, and I'm glad you didn't." Then we had more talk. And at last a kind of proud, serious look came upon her face, and she turned and pointed a finger at the big house. "The Allens," says she, "have lived in Elmcroft for 100 years. We are a proud family. Look at that mansion. It has 50 rooms. See the pillars and porches and balconies. The ceilings in the reception rooms and the ballroom are 28 feet high. My father is a lineal descendant of belted earls. I belted one of 'em once in the Duquesne Hotel in Pittsburgh," says I, "and he didn't offer to resent it. He was there dividing his attentions between Monongalia whiskey and heiresses, and he got fresh." "Of course," she goes on, "my father wouldn't allow a drummer to set his foot in Elmcroft. If he knew that I was talking to one over the fence, he would lock me in my room." "Would you let me come there?" says I. "Would you talk to me if I was to call? For," I goes on, "if you said I might come and see you, the earls might be belted or suspendered or pinned up with safety pins as far as I'm concerned." "I must not talk to you," she says, "because we have not been introduced. It is not exactly proper. So I will say good-bye, Mr. "Say the name," says I. "You haven't forgotten it." "Pescud," she says, a little mad. "The rest of the name," I demands, cool as could be. "John," she says. "John what?" I says. "John A.," says she, with her head high. "Are you through now?" "I'm coming to see the belted earl tomorrow," I says. "He'll feed you to his foxhounds," she says, laughing. "If he does, it'll improve their running," says I. "I'm something of a hunter myself." "I must be going in now," she says. "I oughtn't to have spoken to you at all. I hope you'll have a pleasant trip back to Minneapolis or Pittsburgh, was it? Goodbye." "Good night," says I. "And it wasn't Minneapolis. What's your name first, please?" She hesitated. Then she pulled a leaf off a bush and said, "My name is Jessie," she says. "Good night, Miss Allen," says I. The next morning at 11 sharp, I rang the doorbell of that World's Fair main building. After about 3/4 of an hour, an old nigger man, about 80, showed up and asked what I wanted. I gave him my business card and said I wanted to see the colonel. He showed me in. "Say, did you ever crack open a wormy English walnut? That's what that house was like. There wasn't enough furniture in it to fill an $8 flat. Some old horsehair lounges and 3-legged chairs and some framed ancestors on the walls were all that met the eye. But when Colonel Allen comes in, the place seems to light up. You can almost hear a band playing and see a bunch of old-timers in wigs and white stockings dancing a quadrille. It was the style of him, although he had on the same shabby clothes I saw him wear at the station. For about 9 seconds he had me rattled, and I came mighty near to getting cold feet and trying to sell him some plate glass. But I got my nerve back pretty quick. He asked me to sit down, and I told him everything. I told him how I followed his daughter from Cincinnati and what I did it for, and all about my salary and prospects, and explained to him my little code of living, to be always decent and right in your hometown, and when you're on the road, never take more than 4 glasses of beer a day, or play higher than a 25-cent limit. At first I thought he was going to throw me out of the window, but I kept on talking. Pretty soon I had a chance to tell him that story about the Western congressman who had lost his pocketbook and the grass widow. You remember that story. Well, that got him to laughing, and I'll bet that was the first laugh those ancestors in horsehair sofas had heard in many a day. We talked 2 hours. I told him everything I knew, and then he began to ask questions, and I told him the rest. All I asked of him was to give me a chance. If I couldn't make a hit with the little lady, I'd clear out and not bother any more. At last he said, "There was a Sir Courtney Pescud in the time of Charles I, if I remember rightly." "If there was," says I, "he can't claim kin with our bunch. We've always lived in and around Pittsburgh. I've got an uncle in the real estate business and one in trouble somewhere out in Kansas. You can inquire about any of the rest of us from anybody in Old Smoky Town and get satisfactory replies. Did you ever run across that story about the captain of the whaler who tried to make a sailor say his prayers?" says I. "It occurs to me that I have never been so fortunate," says the colonel. So I told it to him. Laugh. I was wishing to myself that he was a customer. What a bill of glass I'd sell him. And then he says, "The relating of anecdotes and humorous occurrences has always seemed to me, Mr. Pescud, to be of a particularly agreeable way of promoting and perpetuating amenities between friends. With your permission, I will relate to you a fox-hunting story with which I was personally connected, and which may furnish you some amusement." So he tells it. It takes 40 minutes by the watch. Did I laugh? Well, say when I got my face straight, he calls in old Pete, the superannuated darky, and sends him down to the hotel to bring up my valise. It was Elmcroft for me while I was in town. 2 evenings later, I got a chance to speak a word with Miss Jessie, alone on the porch while the colonel was thinking up another story. "It's going to be a fine evening," says I. "He's coming," says she. "He's going to tell you, this time, the story about the old Negro and the green watermelons. It always comes after the one about the Yankees and the game rooster. There was another time," she goes on, "that you nearly got left. It was at Pulaski City." "Yes," says I remember. My foot slipped as I was jumping on the step, and I nearly tumbled off." "I know," she says. "And I was afraid you had, John A. I was afraid you had." And then she skips into the house through one of the big windows. 4. "Coke down," droned the porter, making his way through the slowing car. Pescud gathered his hat and baggage with the leisurely promptness of an old traveler. "I married her a year ago," says John. "I told you I built a house in the East End. The colonel, is there too. I find him waiting at the gate whenever I get back from a trip to hear any new story I might have picked up on the road." I glanced out of the window. Coketown was nothing more than a ragged hillside dotted with a score of black, dismal huts, propped up against dreary mounds of slag and clinkers. It rained in slanting torrents, too, and the rills foamed and splashed down through the black mud to the railroad tracks. "You won't sell much plate glass here, John," said I. "Why do you get off at this end of the world?" "Why?" said Pescud. "The other day I took Jessie for a little trip to Philadelphia, and coming back she thought she saw some petunias in a pot in one of those windows over there, just like some she used to raise down in the old Virginia home. So I thought I'd drop off here for the night and see if I could dig up some of the cuttings or blossoms for her. Here we are. Good night, old man. I gave you the address. Come out and see us when you have time." The train moved forward. One of the dotted brown ladies insisted on having windows raised, now that the rain beat against them. The porter came along with his mysterious wand and began to light the car. I glanced downward and saw the bestseller. I picked it up and set it carefully farther along on the floor of the car, where the raindrops would not fall upon it. And then, suddenly, I smiled, and seemed to see that life has no geographical metes and bounds. "Good luck to you, Trevelyan," I said, "and may you get the petunias for your princess." End of bestseller. Recording by Roxanne Weber. RoxanneWeber.com.
Section 15 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim Cotter, Baraboo, Wisconsin, USA. Options by O. Henry. Section 15. Rus in urbe. Considering men in relation to money, there are three kinds whom I dislike. Men who have more money than they can spend, men who have more money than they do spend, and men who spend more money than they have. Of the three varieties, I believe I have the least liking for the first. But as a man, I liked Spencer Grenville North pretty well, although he had something like 2 or 10 or 30 millions. I've forgotten exactly how many. I did not leave town that summer. I usually went down to a village on the south shore of Long Island. The place was surrounded by duck farms, and the ducks and dogs and whippoorwills and rusty windmills made so much noise that I could sleep as peacefully as if I were in my own flat 6 doors from the elevated railroad in New York. But that summer I did not go. Remember that. One of my friends asked me why I did not. I replied, "Because, old man, New York is the finest summer resort in the world." You've heard that phrase before, but that is what I told him. I was press agent that year for Binkley and Bing, the theatrical managers and producers. Of course, you know what a press agent is. Well, he is not. That is the secret of being one. Binkley was touring France in his new CNN Williamson car, and Bing had gone to Scotland to learn curling, which he seemed to associate in his mind with hot tongs rather than with ice. Before they left, they gave me June and July on salary for my vacation, which act was in accord with their large spirit of liberality. But I remained in New York, which I had decided was the finest summer resort but I said that before. On July 10th, North came to town from his camp in the Adirondacks. Try to imagine a camp with 16 rooms, plumbing, eider-down quilts, a butler, a garage, solid silver plate, and a long-distance telephone. Of course, it was in the woods. If Mr. Pinchot wants to preserve the forests, let him give every citizen $2 or $10 or $30 million, and the trees will all gather around the summer camps, as the Burnham Woods came to Dunsinane, and be preserved. North came to see me in my 3 rooms and bath, extra charge for light when used extravagantly or all night. He slapped me on the back, I'd rather have my shins kicked any day, and greeted me with outdoor obstreperousness and revolting good spirits. He was insolently brown and healthy-looking, and offensively well-dressed. "Just ran down for a few days," said he, "to sign some papers and stuff like that. My lawyer wired me to come." "Well, you indolent cockney, what are you doing in town? I took a chance and telephoned, and they said you were here. What's the matter with that utopia on Long Island, where you used to take your typewriter and your villainous temper every summer? Anything wrong with your swans, weren't they, that used to sing on the farms at night?" "Ducks," said I. "The songs of swans are for luckier ears. They swim and curve their necks in artificial lakes on the estates of the wealthy to delight the eyes of the favorites of fortune." "Also in Central Park," said North, "to delight the eyes of immigrants and bummers. I've seen 'em there lots of times. But why are you in the city so late in the summer?" "New York City," I began to recite, "is the finest "No, you don't," said North emphatically. "You don't spring that old one on me. I know you better. Man, you ought to have gone up with us this summer. The Prestons are there, and Tom Volney, and the Monroes, and Lulu Stanford, and the Miss Kennedy and her aunt that you liked so well." "I never liked Miss Kennedy's aunt," I said. "Didn't say you did," said North. "We are having the greatest time we've ever had. The pickerel and trout are so ravenous that I believe they would swallow your hook with a Montana copper mine prospectus fastened on it. And we have a couple of electric launches, and I'll tell you what we do every night or two. We tow a rowboat behind each one with a big phonograph and a boy to change the discs in 'em. On the water, and 20 yards behind you, they're not so bad. And there are passably good roads through the woods when we go motoring. I shipped 2 cars up there. And the Pine Cliff Inn is only 3 miles away. You know the Pine Cliff. Some good people are there this season, and we run over to the dances twice a week. Can't you go back with me for a week, old man?" I laughed. "Northy," said I, If I may be so familiar with a millionaire, because I hate both the names Spencer and Grenville, your invitation is meant kindly, but the city in the summertime for me. Here, while the bourgeoisie is away, I can live as Nero lived, barring, thank heaven, the fiddling, while the city burns at 90 in the shade. The tropics and the zones wait upon me like handmaidens. I sit under Florida palms and eat pomegranates while Boreas himself, electrically conjured up, blows upon me his arctic breath. As for trout, you know yourself that Jean at Maurice's cooks them better than anyone else in the world. Be advised, said North. My chef has pinched the blue ribbon from the lot. He lays some slices of bacon inside the trout, wraps it all in corn husks, the husks of green corn, you know, buries them in hot ashes, and covers them with live coals. We build fires on the bank of the lake and have fish suppers. I know, said I. And the servants bring down tables and chairs and damask cloths, and you eat with silver forks. I know the kinds of camps that you millionaires have. And there are champagne pails set about, disgracing the wildflowers, and no doubt Madame Tetrazzini to sing in the boat pavilion after the trout. Oh, no, said North concernedly. We were never as bad as that. We did have a variety troupe up from the city 3 or 4 nights, but they weren't stars by as far as light can travel in the same length of time. I always like a few home comforts even when I'm roughing it. But don't tell me you prefer to stay in the city during summer. I don't believe it. If you do, why did you spend your summers there for the last 4 years? Even sneaking away from town on a night train, and refusing to tell your friends where this Arcadian village was. Because, said I, they might have followed me and discovered it. But since then I have learned that Amaryllis has come to town. The coolest things, the freshest, the brightest, the choicest are to be found in the city. If you've nothing on hand this evening, I will show you. I'm free, said North, and I have my light car outside. I suppose, since you've been converted to the town, that your idea of rural sport is to have a little whirl between bicycle cops in Central Park, and then a mug of sticky ale in some stuffy rathskeller, under a fan that can't stir up as many revolutions in a week as Nicaragua can in a day. We'll begin with the spin through the park, anyhow, I said. I was choking with the hot, stale air of my little apartment, and I wanted that breath of the cool to brace me for the task of proving to my friend that New York was the greatest, and so forth. Where can you find any fresher or purer air than this? I asked as we sped into Central Park's bosquiest dell. Air? Said North, contemptuously. Do you call this air, this muggy vapor, smelling of garbage and gasoline smoke? Man, I wish you could get one sniff of the real Adirondack article in the pine woods at daylight. I have heard of it, said I, but for fragrance and tang and a joy in the nostrils, I would not give one puff of sea breeze across the bay, down on my little boat dock on Long Island, for 10 of your turpentine-scented tornadoes. Then why, asked North a little curiously, don't you go there instead of staying cooped up in this greater bakery? Because, said I doggedly, I have discovered that New York is the greatest summer— Don't say that again, interrupted North. Unless you've actually got a job as general passenger agent of the subway. You can't really believe it. I went to some trouble to try to prove my theory to my friend. The Weather Bureau and the season had conspired to make the argument worthy of an able advocate. The city seemed stretched on a broiler directly above the furnaces of Avernus. There was a kind of tepid gaiety afoot and a wheel in the boulevards, mainly evinced by languid men strolling about in straw hats and evening clothes, and rows of idle taxicabs with their flags up, looking like a blockaded 4th of July procession. The hotels kept up a specious brilliancy and hospitable outlook, but inside one saw vast empty caverns, and the footrails at the bars gleamed brightly from long disacquaintance with the sole leather of customers. In the crosstown streets, the steps of the old brownstone houses were swarming with stoopers, that motley race hailing from skylight room and basement, bringing out their straw doorstep mats to sit on, and fill the air with strange noises and opinions. North and I dined on top of a hotel, and here for a few minutes I thought I'd made a score. An east wind, almost cool, blew across the roofless roof. A capable orchestra concealed in a bower of wisteria played with sufficient judgment to make the art of music probable and the art of conversation possible. Some ladies in reproachless summer gowns at other tables gave animation and color to the scene, and an excellent dinner, mainly from the refrigerator, seemed to successfully back my judgment as to summer resorts. But North grumbled all during the meal and cursed his lawyers and prated so of his confounded camp in the woods that I began to wish he would go back there and leave me in my peaceful city retreat. After dining, we went to a roof garden vaudeville that was being much praised. There we found a good bill, an artificially cooled atmosphere, cold drinks, prompt service, and a gay, well-dressed audience. North was bored. "If this isn't comfortable enough for you on the hottest August night for 5 years," I said, a little sarcastically, "you might think about the kids in Delancey and Hester Streets, lying out on the fire escapes with their tongues hanging out, trying to get a breath of air that hasn't been fried on both sides. The contrast might increase your enjoyment." "Don't talk socialism," said North. "I gave $500 to the Free Ice Fund on the 1st of May. I'm contrasting these stale, artificial, hollow, wearisome amusements with the enjoyment a man can get in the woods. You should see the firs and pines do skirt dances during a storm, and lie down flat and drink out of mountain branch at the end of a day's tramp after the deer. That's the only way to spend a summer. Get out and live with nature." "I agree with you absolutely," said I, with emphasis. For one moment I had relaxed my vigilance and had spoken my true sentiments. North looked at me long and curiously. "Then why, in the name of Pan and Apollo," he asked, "have you been singing this deceitful paean to summer in town?" I suppose I looked my guilt. "Ha!" said North. "I see. May I ask her name?" "Annie Ashton," said I, simply. "She played Nanette in Binkley and Bing's production of The Silver Cord. She is to have a better part next season." "Take me to see her," said North. Miss Ashton lived with her mother in a small hotel. They were out of the West and had a little money that bridged the seasons. As press agent of Binkley and Bing, I had tried to keep her before the public. As Robert James Vandiver, I had hoped to withdraw her. For if ever one was made to keep company with said Vandiver, and smell the salt breeze on the south shore of Long Island, and listen to the ducks quack in the watches of the night, it was the Ashtons set forth above. But she had a soul above ducks, above nightingales, aye, even above birds of paradise. She was very beautiful, with quiet ways, and seemed genuine. She had both taste and talent for the stage, and she liked to stay at home and read and make caps for her mother. She was unvaryingly kind and friendly with Binkley and Bing's press agent. Since the theater had closed, she had allowed Mr. Vandiver to call in an unofficial role. I had often spoken to her of my friend Spencer Grenville North, and so, as it was early, the first turn of the vaudeville being not yet over, we left to find a telephone. Miss Ashton would be very glad to see Mr. Vandiver and Mr. North. We found her fitting a new cap on her mother. I never saw her look more charming. North made himself disagreeably entertaining. He was a good talker and had a way with him. Besides, he had 2 or 10 or 30 millions, I've forgotten which. I incautiously admired the mother's cap, whereupon she brought out her store of a dozen or 2, and I took a course in edging and frills. Even though Annie's fingers had pinked or ruched or hemmed or whatever you do to 'em, they palled upon me, and I could hear North driveling to Annie about his odious Adirondack camp. 2 days after that, I saw North in his motor car with Miss Ashton and her mother. On the next afternoon, he dropped in on me. "Bobby," said he, "this old burg isn't such a bad proposition in the summertime after all. Since I've been knocking around, it looks better to me. There are some first-rate musical comedies and light operas on the roofs and the outdoor gardens. And if you hunt up the right places and stick to soft drinks, you can keep about as cool here as you can in the country. Hang it, when you come to think of it, there's nothing much to the country anyhow. You get tired and sunburned and lonesome, and you have to eat any old thing that the cook dishes up to you." "It makes a difference, doesn't it?" said I. "It certainly does. Now, I found some whitebait yesterday at Maurice's with a new sauce that beats anything in the trout line that I ever tasted." "It makes a difference, doesn't it?" I said. "Immense. The sauce is the main thing with whitebait." "It makes a difference, doesn't it?" I asked. looking him straight in the eye. He understood. "Look here, Bob," he said. "I was going to tell you. I couldn't help it. I'll play fair with you, but I'm going to win. She is the one particular for me." "All right," said I. "It's a fair field. There are no rights for you to encroach upon." On Thursday afternoon, Miss Ashton invited North and myself to have tea in her apartment. He was devoted, and she was more charming than usual. By avoiding the subject of caps, I managed to get a word or two into and out of the talk. Miss Ashton asked me in a make-conversational tone something about next season's tour. "Oh," said I don't know about that. I'm not going to be with Binkley and Bing next season." "Why, I thought," said she, "that they were going to put the #1 road company under your charge. I thought you told me so." "They were," said I, "but they won't. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to the south shore of Long Island and buy a small cottage I know there on the edge of the bay. And I'll buy a catboat and a rowboat and a shotgun and a yellow dog. I've got money enough to do it. And I'll smell the salt wind all day when it blows from the sea, and the pine odor when it blows from the land. And of course I'll write plays until I have a trunk full of them on hand. And the next and the biggest thing I'll do will be to buy that duck farm next door. Few people understand ducks. I can watch them for hours. They can march better than any company in the National Guard, and they can play Follow My Leader better than the entire Democratic Party. Their voices don't amount to much, but I like to hear 'em. They wake you up a dozen times a night, but there's a homely sound about their quacking that is more musical to me than the cry of "Fresh strawberries!" under your window in the morning when you want to sleep. And, I went on enthusiastically, do you know the value of ducks besides their beauty and intelligence and order of sweetness of voice? Picking their feathers gives you an unfailing and never-ceasing income. On a farm that I know, the feathers were sold for $400 in 1 year. Think of that. And the ones shipped to the market will bring in more money than that. Yes, I am for the ducks and the salt breeze coming over the bay. I think I shall get a Chinaman cook, and with him and the dog and the sunsets for company, I shall do well. No more of this dull, baking, scentless, roaring city for me." Miss Ashton looked surprised. North laughed. "I'm going to begin one of my plays tonight," I said, "so I must be going." And with that I took my departure. A few days later, Miss Ashton telephoned to me, asking me to call at 4 in the afternoon. I did. "You have been very good to me," she said, hesitatingly, "and I thought I would tell you. I'm going to leave the stage." "Yes," said I suppose you will. They usually do when there's so much money." "There is no money," she said, "or very little. Our money's almost gone." "But I'm told," said I, "that he has something like 2 or 10 or 30 millions. I've forgotten which." "I know what you mean," she said. "I will not pretend that I do not. I am not going to marry Mr. North." "Then why are you leaving the stage?" I asked severely. "What else can you do to earn a living?" She came closer to me, and I can see the look in her eyes yet as she spoke. "I can pick ducks," she said. We sold the first year's feathers for $350. End of Rus in Urbe. Recording by Jim Cotter, Baraboo, Wisconsin, USA.
Section 16 of Options. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Larry Wilson. Options by O. Henry. A Poor Rule. I have always maintained, and asserted time to time, that woman is no mystery, that man can foretell, construe, subdue, comprehend, and interpret her. That she is a mystery has been foisted by herself upon credulous mankind. Whether I am right or wrong we shall see. As Harper's Drawer used to say in bygone years, the following good story is told of Miss Blank, Mr. Blank, Mr. Blank, and Mr. Blank, we shall have to omit Bishop X and the Reverend Blank, for they do not belong. In those days Paloma was a new town on the line of the Southern Pacific. A reporter would have called it a mushroom town, but it was not. Paloma was first and last of the toadstool variety. The train stopped there at noon for the engine to drink and for the passengers both to drink and to dine. There was a new yellow pine hotel, also a wool warehouse, and perhaps 36 box residences. The rest was composed of tents, cow ponies, black waxy mud, and mesquite trees, all bound round by a horizon. Paloma was an about-to-be city. The houses represented faith, the tents hope, the twice-a-day train by which you might leave creditably sustained the role of charity. The Parisian restaurant occupied the muddiest spot in the town while it rained, and the warmest when it shone. It was operated, owned, and perpetuated by a citizen known as Old Man Hinkle, who had come out of Indiana to make his fortune in this land of condensed milk and sorghum. There was a 4-room, unpainted, weather-boarded box house in which the family lived. From the kitchen extended a shelter, made of poles covered with chaparral brush. Under this was a table and 2 benches, each 20 feet long, the product of Paloma home carpentry. Here was set forth the roast mutton, the stewed apples, boiled beans, soda biscuits, mutton orpie, and hot coffee of the Parisian menu. Ma Hinkle was a subordinate known to the ears as Betty, but denied to the eyesight, presided at the range. Pa Hinkle himself, with salamandrous thumbs, served the scalding viands. During rush hours a Mexican youth, who rolled and smoked cigarettes between courses, aided him in waiting on the guests. As is customary at Parisian banquets, I placed the sweets at the end of my wordy menu. Eileen Hinkle. The spelling is correct, for I have seen her write it. No doubt she had been named by ear, but she so splendidly bore the orthography that Tom Moore himself, had he seen her, would have endorsed the phonography. Eileen was the daughter of the house, and the first lady cashier to invade the territory south of an east-west line drawn through Galveston and Del Rio. She sat on a high stool in a rough pine grandstand, or was it a temple, under the shelter at the door of the kitchen. There was a barbed wire protection in front of her, with a little arch under which you passed your money. Heaven knows why the barbed wire, for every man who dined Parisianly there would have died in her service. Her duties were light. Each meal was $1. You put it under the arch, and she took it. I set out with the intent to describe Eileen Hinkle to you. Instead, I must refer you to the volume by Edmund Burke entitled A Philosophical Inquiry into the Origin of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful. It is an exhaustive treatise, dealing first with the primitive conceptions of beauty. Roundness and smoothness, I think they are, according to Burke. It is well said, rotundity is a patent charm. As for smoothness, the more new wrinkles a woman acquires, the smoother she becomes. Eileen was strictly vegetable compound, guaranteed under the pure ambrosia and balm of Gilead Act of the year of the fall of Adam. She was a fruit-stand blonde, strawberries, peaches, cherries, etc. Her eyes were wide apart, and she possessed a calm that precedes a storm that never comes. But it seems to me that words, at any rate are wasted in an effort to describe the beautiful. Like fancy, it is engendered in the eyes. There are 3 kinds of beauties. I was foreordained to be homiletic. I can never stick to a story. The first is the freckle-faced, snub-nosed girl whom you like. The second is Maud Adams. The third is, or are, the ladies of Bouguereau's paintings. Eileen Hinkle was the fourth. She was the mayoress of Spotless Town. there were 1,000 golden apples coming to her as Helen of the Troy laundries. The Parisian restaurant was within a radius. Even from beyond its circumference, men rode into Paloma to win her smiles. They got them. 1 meal, 1 smile, $1. But with all her impartiality, Eileen seemed to favor 3 of her admirers above the rest. According to the rules of politeness, I will mention myself last. The first was an artificial product known as Brian Jacks, a name that had obviously met with reverses. Jacks was the outcome of paved cities. He was a small man made of some material resembling flexible sandstone. His hair was the color of a brick Quaker meeting house. His eyes were twin cranberries. His mouth was like the aperture under a drop letters here sign. He knew every city from Bangor to San Francisco, thence north to Portland, thence south 45 east to a given point in Florida. He had mastered every art, trade, game, business, profession, and sport in the world, had been present at, or hurrying on his way to, every headline event that had ever occurred between oceans since he was 5 years old. You might open the atlas, place your finger at random upon the name of a town, and Jacks would tell you the front names of 3 prominent citizens before you could close it again. He spoke patronizingly, and even disrespectfully, of Broadway, Beacon Hill, Michigan, Euclid, and Fifth Avenues, and the St. Louis Four Courts. Compared with him as a cosmopolite, the wandering Jew would have seemed a mere hermit. He had learned everything the world could teach him, and he would tell you about it. I hate to be reminded of Pollock's Course of Time, and so do you, but every time I saw Jacks I would think of the poet's description of another poet by the name of G. Byron, who drank early, deeply drank draughts that common millions might have quenched, then died of thirst because there was no more to drink. That fitted Jacks, except that instead of dying, he came to Paloma, which was about the same thing. He was a telegrapher and station and express agent at $75 a month. Why a young man who knew everything and could do everything was content to serve in such an obscure capacity I never could understand, although he let out a hint once that it was as a personal favor to the president and stockholders of the S.P. Railway Company. One more line of description, and I turn Jacks over to you. He wore bright blue clothes, yellow shoes, and a bow tie made of the same cloth as his shirt. My rival number 2 was Bud Cunningham, whose services had been engaged by a ranch near Paloma to assist in compelling refractory cattle to keep within the bounds of decorum and order. Bud was the only cowboy off the stage that I ever saw who looked like one on it. He wore the sombrero, the chaps, and the handkerchief tied at the back of his neck. Twice a week Bud rode in from Valverde Ranch to sup at the Parisian restaurant. He rode a many high-handed Kentucky horse at a tremendously fast lope, which animal he would rein up so suddenly under the big mesquite at the corner of the brush shelter that his hoofs would plow canals yards long in the loam. Jacks and I were regular boarders at the restaurant, of course. The front room of the Hinkle house was as neat a little parlor as there was in the black waxy country. It was all willow rocking chairs, and home-knit tidies, and albums and conch shells in a row, and a little upright piano in one corner. Here Jacks and Bud and I, or sometimes 1 or 2 of us, according to our good luck, used to sit of evenings when the tide of trade was over and visit Miss Hinkle. Eileen was a girl of ideas. She was destined for higher things, if there can be anything higher, than taking in dollars all day through a barbed wire wicket. She had read and listened and thought. Her looks would have formed a career for a less ambitious girl, but rising superior to mere beauty, she must establish something in the nature of a salon, the only one in Paloma. "Don't you think that Shakespeare was a great writer?" she would ask, with such a pretty little knit of her arched brows that the late Ignatius Donnelly himself, had he seen it, could scarcely have saved his bacon. Eileen was of the opinion, also, that Boston is more cultured than Chicago, that Rosa Bonheur was one of the greatest of women painters, that Westerners are more spontaneous and open-hearted than Easterners, that London must be a very foggy city, and that California must be quite lovely in the springtime, and of many other opinions indicating a keeping up with the world's best thought. These, however, were but gleaned from hearsay and evidence. Eileen had theories of her own. One in particular she disseminated to us untiringly. Flattery she detested. Frankness and honesty of speech and action, she declared, were the chief mental ornaments of man and woman. If ever she could like anyone, it would be for those qualities. "I'm awfully weary," she said one evening, when we three musketeers of the mesquite were in the little parlor, "of having compliments on my looks paid to me. I know I'm not beautiful." Bud Cunningham told me afterward that it was all he could do to keep from calling her a liar when she said that. "I'm only a little Middle Western girl," went on Eileen, "who just wants to be simple and neat, and tries to help her father make a humble living." Old man Hinkle was shipping $1,000 silver a month clear profit to a bank in San Antonio. Bud twisted around in his chair and bent the rim of his hat, from which he could never be persuaded to separate. He did not know whether she wanted what she said she wanted, or what she knew she deserved. Many a wiser man has hesitated at deciding. Bud decided. "Why, Miss Eileen, beauty, as you might say, ain't everything. Not saying that you haven't your share of good looks. I always admired more than anything else about you the nice, kind way you treat your ma and pa. But anyone what's good to their parents and is kind of homebody don't specially need to be too pretty." Eileen gave him one of her sweetest smiles. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Cunningham," she said. "I consider that one of the finest compliments I've had in a long time. I'd so much rather hear you say that than to hear you talk about my eyes and hair. I'm glad you believe me when I say I don't like flattery." Our cue was there for us. Bud had made a good guess. You couldn't lose Jack's. He chimed in next. "Sure thing, Miss Eileen," he said. "The good lookers don't always win out. Now, you ain't bad looking, of course, but that's nix cum ruse. I knew a girl once in Dubuque with a face like a cocoanut, who could skin the cat twice on a horizontal bar without changing hands. Now, a girl might have the California peach crop mashed to marmalade and not be able to do that. I've seen, worse lookers than you, Miss Eileen. But what I like about you is the business way you've got of doing things. Cool and wise. That's the winning way for a girl. Mr. Hinkle told me the other day you'd never taken in a lead silver dollar or a plugged one since you've been on the job. Now that's the stuff for a girl. That's what catches me." Jack's got his smile, too. "Thank you, Mr. Jacks," said Eileen. "If you only knew how I appreciate anyone's being candid and not a flatterer. I get so tired of people telling me I'm pretty. I think it is the loveliest thing to have friends who tell you the truth." Then I thought I saw an expectant look on Eileen's face as she glanced toward me. I had a wild, sudden impulse to dare fate, and tell her of all the beautiful handiwork of the great artificer, she was the most exquisite, that she was a flawless pearl, gleaming pure and serene in a setting of black mud and emerald prairies, that she was a corker, and as for mine, I cared not if she were as cruel as a serpent's tooth to her fond parents, or if she couldn't tell a plugged dollar from a bridle buckle. If I might sing, chant, praise, glorify, and worship her peerless and wonderful beauty. But I refrained. I feared the fate of a flatterer. I had witnessed her delight at the crafty and discreet words of Bud and Jack's. No, Miss Hinkle was not one to be beguiled by the plated silver tongue of a flatterer. So I joined the ranks of the candid and honest, At once I became mendacious and didactic. "In all ages, Miss Hinkle," said I, "in spite of the poetry and romance of each, intellect in woman has been admired more than beauty. Even in Cleopatra herself men found more charm in her queenly mind than in her looks." "Well, I should think so," said Eileen. "I've seen pictures of her that weren't so much. She had an awfully long nose." "If I may say so," I went on, "you remind me of Cleopatra, Miss Eileen." "Why, my nose isn't so long," she said, opening her eyes wide and touching that comely feature with a dimpled forefinger. "I mean," said I mean as to mental endowments." "Oh," she said, and then I got my smile just as Bud and Jax had got theirs. "Thank every one of you," she said very, very sweetly, "for being so frank and honest with me. That's the way I want you to be always. Just tell me plainly and truthfully what you think, and we'll all be the best friends in the world. And now, because you've been so good to me, and understand so well how I dislike people who do nothing but pay me exaggerated compliments, I'll sing and play a little for you." Of course we expressed our thanks in joy, but we would have been better pleased if Eileen had remained in her low rocking chair face to face with us and let us gaze upon her, for she was no Adelina Patti, not even on the farewellest of the Diva's farewell tours. She had a cooing little voice like that of a turtle dove that could almost fill the parlor when the windows and doors were closed, and Betty was not rattling the lids of the stove in the kitchen. She had a gamut that I estimate about 8 inches on the piano, and her runs and trills sounded like the clothes bubbling in your grandmother's iron washpot. Believe that she must have been beautiful when I tell you that it sounded like music to us. Eileen's musical taste was catholic. She would sing through a pile of sheet music on the left-hand top of the piano, laying each slaughtered composition on the right-hand top. The next evening she would sing from the right to left. Her favorites were Mendelssohn and Moody and Sankey. By request she always wound up with "Sweet Violets" and "When the Leaves Begin to Turn." When we left at 10 o'clock, the 3 of us would go down to Jack's little wooden station and sit on the platform swinging our feet and trying to pump one another for clues as to which way Miss Eileen's inclinations seemed to lean. That is the way of rivals. They do not avoid and glower at one another. They convene and converse and construe, striving by the art politic to estimate the strength of the enemy. One day there came a dark horse to Paloma, a young lawyer who at once flaunted his shingle and was himself spectacularly upon the town. His name was C. Vincent Vesey. You could see at a glance that he was a recent graduate of a southwestern law school. His Prince Albert coat, light striped trousers, broad-brimmed soft black hat, and narrow white muslin bow tie proclaimed that more loudly than any diploma could. Vesey was a compound of Daniel Webster, Lord Chesterfield, Beau Brummel, and Little Jack Horner. His coming boomed Paloma. The next day after he arrived, an addition to the town was surveyed and laid off in lots. Of course Vesey, to further his professional fortunes, must mingle with the citizenry and outliers of Paloma. But as well as with our soldier men, he was bound to seek popularity with the gay dogs of the place. So Jax and Bud Cunningham and I came to be honored by his acquaintance. The doctrine of predestination would have been discredited had not Vesey seen Eileen Hinkle and become fourth in the tourney. Magnificently he boarded at the Yellow Pine Hotel instead of at the Parisian restaurant, but he came to be a formidable visitor in the Hinkle parlor. His competition reduced Bud to an inspired increase of profanity, drove Jax to an outburst of slang so weird that it sounded more horrible than the most trenchant of Bud's imprecations, and made me dumb with gloom. For Vesey had the rhetoric. Words flowed from him like oil from a gusher. Hyperbole, compliment, praise, appreciation, Honeyed gallantry, golden opinions, eulogy, and unveiled panegyric vied with one another for preeminence in his speech. We had small hopes that Eileen could resist his oratory and Prince Albert. But a day came that gave us courage. About dusk one evening I was sitting on the little gallery in front of the Hinkle parlor, waiting for Eileen to come, when I heard voices inside. She had come into the room with her father, and old man Hinkle began to talk to her. I had observed before that he was a shrewd man, and not unphilosophic. "Eily," he said, "I notice there's 3 or 4 young fellers that have been calling to see you regular for a while. Is there any one of 'em you like better than another?" "Why, Pa," she answered, "I like all of them very well. I think Mr. Cunningham and Mr. Jacks and Mr. Harris are very nice young men. They are so frank and honest in everything they say to me. I haven't known Mr. Vesey very long, but I think he's a very nice young man. He's so frank and honest in everything he says to me." "Now, that's what I'm gettin' at," says old Hinkle. "You've always been sayin' you like people what tell the truth and don't go humbuggin' you with compliments and bogus talk. Now suppose you make a test of these fellers, and see which one of 'em will talk the straightest to you." "But how'll I do it, Pa?" "I'll tell you how. You know you sing a little bit. Eily, you took music lessons nearly 2 years in Logansport. It wasn't long, but it was all we could afford then. And your teacher said you didn't have any voice, and it was a waste of money to keep on. Now suppose you ask the fellers what they think of your singin', and see what each of them tells you. The man that'll tell you the truth about it will have a mighty lot of nerve, and'll do to tie to. What do you think of the plan?" "All right, Pa," said Eileen. "I think it's a good idea. I'll try it." Eileen and Mr. Hinkle went out of the room through the inside doors. Unobserved, I hurried down to the station. Jacks was at his telegraph table waiting for 8 o'clock to come. It was Bud's night in town, and when he rode in, I repeated the conversation to them both. I was loyal to my rivals, as all true admirers of all Eileen's should be. Simultaneously, the 3 of us were smitten by an uplifting thought. Surely this test would eliminate Vesey from the contest. He, with his unctuous flattery, would be driven from the lists. Well we remembered Eileen's love of frankness and honesty, how she treasured truth and candor above vain compliment and blandishment. Linking arms, we did a grotesque dance of joy up and down the platform, singing "Muldoon was a solid man" at the top of our voices. That evening 4 of the willow rocking chairs were filled, besides the lucky one that sustained the trim figure of Miss Hinkle. 3 of us awaited with suppressed excitement the application of the test. It was tried on Bud first. "Mr. Cunningham," said Eileen, with her dazzling smile, after she had sung "When the Leaves Begin to Turn," "what do you think of my voice? Frankly and honestly now, as you know I want you always to be toward me." Bud squirmed in his chair at his chance to show the sincerity that he knew was required of him. "I tell you the truth, Miss Eileen," he said earnestly, "you ain't got much more voice than a weasel. Just a little squeak, you know. Of course we all like to hear you sing, for it's kind of sweet and soothin' after all, and you look most as mighty well sittin' on the piano stool as you do faced around. But as for real singin', I reckon you couldn't call it that." I looked closely at Eileen to see if Bud had overdone his frankness, but her pleased smile and sweetly spoken thanks assured me that we were on the right track. "And what do you think, Mr. Jacks?" she asked next. "Take it from me," said Jacks, "you ain't the prima donna class. I've heard 'em warble in every city in the United States, and I tell you your vocal output don't go. Otherwise you've got the Grand Opera bunch sent to the soap factory, in looks I mean, for the high screechers generally look like Mary Ann on her Thursday out. But nix for the gargle work. Your epiglottis ain't a real sidestepper. Its footwork ain't good." With a merry laugh at Jack's criticism, Eileen looked inquiringly at me. I admit that I faltered a little. Was there not such a thing as being too frank? Perhaps I even hedged a little in my verdict, but I stayed with the critics. "I am not skilled in scientific music, Miss Eileen," I said. "But frankly, I cannot praise very highly the singing voice that nature has given you. It has long been a favorite comparison that a great singer sings like a bird. Well, there are birds and birds. I would say that your voice reminds me of the thrush's, throaty, not strong, nor much compass or variety, but still sweet, in its way, and—" "Thank you, Mr. Harris," interrupted Miss Hinkle. "I knew I could depend upon your frankness and honesty." And then C. Vincent Vesey drew back one sleeve from his snowy cuff, and the water came down at Lodore. My memory cannot do justice to his masterly tribute to that priceless, God-given treasure, Miss Hinckley's voice. He raved over it in terms that, if they had been addressed to the morning stars when they sang together, would have made their stellar choir explode in a meteoric shower of flaming self-satisfaction. He marshaled on his little white finger-tips the grand opera stars of all the continents, from Jenny Lind to Emma Abbott, only to depreciate their endowments. He spoke of larynxes, of chest notes, of phrasing, arpeggios, and other strange paraphernalia of the throaty art. He admitted, as though driven to a corner, that Jenny Lind had a note or two in the high register that Miss Hinkle had not yet acquired, but that was a mere matter of practice and training. As a peroration, he predicted, solemnly predicted, a career in vocal art for the coming star of the Southwest, and one of which grand old Texas may well be proud, hitherto unsurpassed in the annals of musical history. Well, when we left at 10, Eileen gave each of us her usual warm, cordial handshake, entrancing smile, and invitation to call again. I could not see that one was favored above or below another, but three of us knew. We knew. We knew that frankness and honesty had won, and that the rivals now numbered 3 instead of 4. Down at the station, Jax brought out a pint bottle of the proper stuff, and we celebrated the downfall of a blatant interloper. 4 days went by without anything happening worthy of recount. On the 5th, Jax and I, entering the brush arbor for our supper, saw the Mexican youth instead of a divinity in a spotless waist and navy blue skirt, taking in dollars through the barbed wire wicket. We rushed into the kitchen, meeting Paul Hinkle coming out with 2 cups of hot coffee in his hands. "Where's Eileen?" we asked in recitative. Pa Hinckley was a kindly man. "Well, gents," said he, "it was a sudden notion she took, but I've got the money, and I let her have her way. She's gone to a conservatory in Boston for 4 years, for to have her voice cultivated. Now excuse me to pass, gents, for this coffee's hot, and my thumbs is tender." That night there were 4 instead of 3 of us sitting on the station platform and swinging our feet. C. Vincent Vesey was one of us. We discussed things while dogs barked at the moon that rose, as big as a 5-cent piece or a flour barrel, over the chaparral. And what we discussed was whether it is better to lie to a woman or to tell her the truth. And as all of us were young then, we did not come to a decision. End of A Poor Rule. End of Options by O. Henry.